Roy Orbison wasn't just the soulful voice behind hits like "Oh, Pretty Woman" and "Only the Lonely." He was also a father of 5. Behind his dark sunglasses and onstage charisma lay a life touched by extreme highs and crushing lows. In the 1960s, Roy and his first wife Claudette welcomed 3 beautiful boys, only for fate to deal them a cruel hand. Later, Roy found love again and had 2 more sons, giving him hope and a second chance at family happiness. But the Orbison family's journey would be far from smooth. In this video, we'll dive into the true story of Roy Orbison's 5 children. From the 2 he tragically lost to the 3 who grew up to carry on their father's name. Stay tuned, because each of Roy's sons has a tale that honors their legendary dad in a unique way. Early family joys and heartbreak. Roy Orbison married his teenage sweetheart, Claudette Freedy, in 1957. They soon started a family, and for a while, life at home was picture perfect. Their first son, Roy Dwayne Orbison, was born in 1958. A second son, Anthony King Orbison, followed in 1962. Roy was overjoyed, often seen doting on his little boys when he wasn't on tour. In 1965, Claudette gave birth to their third son, Wesley Orbison, completing the young family. Roy's career was soaring in the early 1960s, but he always cherished coming home to his children. Friends recall him as a gentle, devoted father, despite his rock and roll lifestyle. However, the Orbisons' happy days were numbered. Tragedy struck in 1966 when Claudette died in a motorcycle accident at just 25 years old. Roy was riding just ahead of her when the unthinkable happened. A truck collided with Claudette's bike, and she did not survive. Roy was devastated. He threw himself into music to cope with the grief, but life as a widowed father of 3 little boys was unimaginably hard. Still, Roy persisted for the sake of his sons. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, an even greater horror befell the family 2 years later. On September 14, 1968, Roy was touring in England, preparing for a show in Bournemouth, when he received news that made his heart sink. A fire had broken out at his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee, and it killed 2 of his children, both Roy Dwayne, age 10, and Anthony, age 6, perished in the blaze, which engulfed the house rapidly. Little Wesley, who was just 3 years old, survived only because he wasn't in the house at the time. Fortunately, Wesley had been staying with his grandparents that day, which spared him from the catastrophe. The fire was believed to have been caused by an aerosol can exploding, a freak accident that turned the Orbison home into an inferno. For Roy Orbison, the loss was absolutely crushing. In the span of 2 years, he had lost his wife and 2 of his 3 young sons. The famously shy and gentle singer was overcome with grief. He reportedly found himself unable to write songs for a long while after the fire. Friends and colleagues noticed a profound sadness in Roy during this period. How could anyone carry on after such heartbreak? Roy later said he felt like part of him died with his boys. The only glimmer of hope in this dark time was Wesley Orbison, Roy's sole surviving child from his first marriage. Wesley was raised by Roy's parents in the years after the fire, giving the toddler a stable home out of the spotlight while his father picked up the pieces of his life. As Wesley grew, he remained very close to his father, but living with his grandparents in West Texas provided a sense of normalcy away from the trauma. Despite all he had been through, Roy did his best to be a loving father to Wesley, visiting him whenever he could. Wesley would later recall that his dad never lost his tenderness, even when carrying such heavy sorrow. A new beginning with Barbara and a second family, broken by loss yet determined to keep living, Roy Orbison found an unexpected second chance at happiness. In mid-1968, while on tour in the UK just months before the tragic fire, Roy met a young German woman named Barbara Jacobs, also known as Barbara Wellhunter. Barbara was just 17 when they met. Roy was 32, but she shared a genuine connection with the soft-spoken rock star. As Roy healed from his heartbreak, Barbara became a source of comfort and hope for him. The two married on March 25, 1969, marking a fresh start for Roy. With Barbara by his side, Roy dared to dream of building a family again. In 1970, Roy and Barbara welcomed a son, Roy Kelton Orbison Jr., named after Roy himself. Finally, Roy had another little boy to hold, and this time he was determined to protect his family at all costs. Roy Jr. was a happy child, often seen laughing in his father's arms and family photos. 5 years later, in 1975, the family grew again with the birth of Alexander Orbison, nicknamed Alex. Roy was overjoyed, often remarking that he felt life had given him a second chance to be the dad he always wanted to be. The late 1970s and 1980s saw Roy Orbison's career enjoy a resurgence. After years of relative quiet, he experienced a comeback with help from admirers in the industry. He even became part of the supergroup Traveling Wilburys in 1988, alongside Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. Through these exciting times, Barbara and the boys were Roy's anchors. The family had moved to Malibu, California in the mid-1980s, giving Roy Jr. and Alex a childhood by the ocean. They lived next door to family friends Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash, who happened to be Alex's godparents. Roy Orbison, once again a busy star, always made time to be with his children, whether it was playing with them on the beach or flying model airplanes together in the yard. By all accounts, Roy Orbison was a doting father who had learned not to take family for granted. He would tell anyone who asked that his kids were his pride and joy. In a bittersweet twist, just as things were looking up, fate intervened one more time. On December 6, 1988, at age 52, Roy Orbison suffered a fatal heart attack and died suddenly. In the hours before his death, he had been playing with his two younger sons, Roy Jr., 18, and Alex, 13, flying model airplanes and spending quality time with them. He even had dinner at his mother's house that evening with his son Wesley, who was by then a 23-year-old young man. Roy's death came out of nowhere. One moment he was a father enjoying a quiet evening with family, the next he was gone. The Orbison children lost their dad, and the world lost an icon. Barbara Orbison became a widow that day, and she was left to raise Roy Jr. and Alex, who were still in their teens, on her own. She also continued to care about Wesley, Roy's eldest surviving son. Ensuring he stayed a part of the family's circle, Barbara took on the responsibility of managing Roy's business affairs and musical legacy, working tirelessly to keep Roy's memory alive for the fans. For over 2 decades after Roy's passing, she protected his image and expanded his legacy, all while parenting the boys through their teens and early adulthood. Sadly, Barbara herself passed away in 2011 from cancer at age 60. But by that time, Roy Orbison's sons were grown men, ready to step up and continue both their father's legacy and the close-knit bond of the Orbison family. Now, let's look at what became of each of Roy Orbison's 5 children, the paths they took on her, both the joys and sorrows they experienced, and show how they turned tragedy into a mission of preserving their father's memory. Number 4. Roy DeWayne and Anthony Orbison. It's important to remember Roy's 2 eldest sons, Roy DeWayne Orbison and Anthony King Orbison, whose lives were cut tragically short. Roy DeWayne, born 1958, was a bright 10-year-old boy in 1968 who loved music like his daddy. Anthony, born 1962, was just 6, a playful child known for his big smiles. On that awful day in 1968, both boys were at home in Tennessee when the house caught fire and they could not escape. The blaze moved too fast, and despite efforts to save them, the 2 little Orbison boys died in the flames. Their father was thousands of miles away on tour, which made the news even more heartbreaking. Roy received the call after coming off stage in England, learning he had lost his precious sons while he was singing for a crowd. The loss of Roy, Dwayne, and Anthony was felt deeply by all who knew the Orbisons. In the wake of the tragedy, Roy Orbison had his sons buried in Tennessee. Friends like Johnny Cash reached out to comfort Roy. In fact, Johnny would later buy the Hendersonville house from Roy, perhaps to help him move forward. Eerie trivia: Johnny Cash's house on that same property also burned down years later. A strange coincidence that people still talk about. Roy seldom spoke publicly about the loss of his two boys. It was a grief too deep for words, but those close to him say he carried their memory in his heart everywhere he went. Every time Roy performed a soulful ballad, you could sense the pain he channeled from his life, including the memory of Roy, Dwayne, and Anthony. Today, the two brothers rest in peace, remembered as beloved sons who will forever remain part of the Orbison story. Number 3. Wesley Orbison was the only child of Roy and Claudette to survive into adulthood. Born in 1965, Wesley was just a toddler when his mother died in 1966, and only 3 when the devastating fire of 1968 took his brothers. Little Wesley's life could easily have been consumed by these tragedies, but thanks to Roy's parents, his grandparents, he was raised in a stable and loving environment away from the public eye. Roy's mother, Nadine, doted on Wesley and helped him grow up like any normal kid in Wink, Texas, the same tiny town where Roy himself grew up. This gave Wesley a chance to have a childhood that wasn't defined solely by loss. As a young man, Wesley stayed connected with his father and later with his stepmother Barbara and his half-brothers. In fact, as Roy grew past the tragedies, he made a point to include Wesley in his new life events. When Roy moved to Malibu in the 1980s, Wesley visited and bonded with Roy Jr. and Alex, building a sense of brotherhood despite their age differences and living in different places. Wesley was 23 and starting his own adult life when Roy Orbison died in 1988, a loss that no doubt affected him deeply, just as losing his mother and brothers had. But Wesley, described by those who know him as gentle and kind like his father, continued to persevere. Surprisingly to some, Wesley inherited a great deal of his father's musical talent. He kept a low profile for years, but music was in his DNA. In 1989, Roy Orbison's final album, Mystery Girl, was released posthumously, and guess who had contributed to it? Wesley co-wrote a song called The Only One on that album, quietly honoring his dad with lyrics from the heart. It was a subtle contribution, but meaningful father and son, indirectly collaborating on Roy's last project. Decades later, when Mystery Girl Deluxe, a special 25th anniversary edition, came out, an unreleased Roy Orbison song called The Way His Love was included. Roy's vocal track was rescued from an old demo, and Wesley, along with his half-brothers, finished the song by adding instrumentals and harmonies. Imagine hearing your late father's voice on a recording and getting the chance to perform alongside him one more time. For Wesley, it was an emotional triumph, literally creating a new Roy Orbison song with his family. Wesley has continued to pursue music in his own right. In 2013, he released his debut album titled Spread Your Wings, which he co-wrote and recorded with John Carter Cash, Johnny Cash's son. By teaming up with another legendary music family's offspring, Wesley showed that he was ready to step out of the shadows and embrace his heritage. The album allowed Wesley to express himself and certainly made his father's fans proud, even if it flew under the mainstream radar. Today, Wesley Orbison is known as a seasoned songwriter and guitarist, living a life that balances his own identity with the responsibility of being Roy Orbison's son. He's often the quieter Orbison brother, avoiding the limelight, but he's deeply involved whenever there's a project honoring his father. Number 2. Roy Orbison Jr., the first of Roy's children from his second marriage, Roy Kelton. Orbison Jr. grew up in the glow of his father's later years. Born in 1970, Roy Jr. was named after his dad and even shares the exact same birthday, April 23rd, as Roy Orbison Sr., which must have felt like destiny. As a child in the 1970s, Roy Jr. experienced a very different upbringing from his older half-siblings. He traveled with his parents on tour, met countless celebrities and musicians, and saw firsthand the adoration fans had for his father. By the time he was 18, however, Roy Jr.'s world was shattered when his father died unexpectedly in 1988. One day, he was flying model airplanes with Dad. The next, he had to say goodbye forever. It was an early lesson that life can change in an instant. Despite the pain of losing his father, Roy Orbison Jr. stepped into adulthood with a strong sense of purpose. Guided by his mother, Barbara's influence, Roy Jr. became passionate about preserving Roy Orbison's musical legacy. He understood that his father's contributions to music were timeless and deserved to be remembered by new generations. Roy Jr. himself is a musician and record producer. While he can sing and play and has performed at tribute shows, his biggest impact has been behind the scenes, making sure Roy Orbison's music continues to reach fans old and new. One of Roy Jr.'s major projects was co-producing Roy Orbison, The Ultimate Collection, a definitive anthology album released in 2016. He and his brothers worked with Sony Legacy Recordings to handpick the very best of Roy's songs from every era, from the Sun Records days all the way through the Traveling Wilburys. Alex, his younger brother, noted that it took years of research and listening to narrow down the perfect track list, but it was a labor of love for the Orbison sons. Roy Jr. felt immense pride seeing his father's work packaged for lifelong fans and newcomers alike, knowing he helped make it happen. Beyond producing music releases, Roy Jr. has become something of an ambassador for his father. In interviews and documentaries, you'll often see a smiling Roy Jr., sharing anecdotes about Roy Orbison's life, dispelling myths, for instance why his dad wore those famous dark glasses, and updating fans on upcoming projects. He has a friendly, down-to-earth demeanor that audiences connect with, perhaps because he genuinely loves talking about his dad. In a 2019 interview, Roy Jr. said, "People often think he is doing favors for his late father by promoting the music, but in reality, it's the opposite. Dad is still doing favors for us by bringing us together and giving us purpose." This heartfelt perspective shows how much Roy Jr. treasures the role of legacy keeper. Roy Jr. also took on a massive project, helping establish the Roy Orbison Museum in Nashville. He worked on this idea for over a decade, collecting memorabilia and finding a way to showcase his father's story. Finally, in April 2019, on what would have been Roy Sr.'s 83rd birthday, the museum opened its doors. Roy Jr. poured his heart into this house of memories, as he calls it, ensuring that fans can walk through and feel Roy Orbison's presence, see his guitars, his iconic glasses, stage outfits, and family photographs. It's a dream realized for Roy Jr., who made a promise to his mother Barbara before she died that he would take care of business in Nashville and keep the Orbison legacy alive. In his personal life, Roy Orbison Jr. is now a family man himself. He's married and has children, including a son named Roy Orbison III. Yes, the name lives on. When Roy III was born, Roy Jr. expressed how joyful it felt to continue the family name into a new generation, a touching tribute to his late father. Number 1, Alex Orbison, born in 1975, is the youngest of Roy Orbison's 5 children. Just an infant when his father's career had a second wind, Alex grew up surrounded by music and big-name friends of his dad. His childhood was filled with unique experiences, playing in the yard with Traveling Wilburys members, stopping by, or visiting Abbey Road Studios as a kid, while his father recorded, for example. Alex was only 13 when Roy died, a heartbreaking age to lose a parent. In the wake of that loss, Alex could have easily drifted away from music out of pain, but instead, he dove headfirst into it. Alex is known to family, friends, and fans by the nickname Orby. As a teenager and young adult, Orby embraced the rock and roll lifestyle more than any of his brothers. His first love was the drums. In fact, Alex's hands were so small as a kid that he started with the violin, then guitar, and piano, before finally settling on drums as his instrument of choice. He proved to have a natural talent for rhythm. By the early 1990s, Alex was already playing in bands. He befriended other rock royalty kids like Dwayne Betts, son of Allman Brothers guitarist Dickie Betts, and Barry Oakley Jr., son of Allman Brothers bassist, and together they formed a band called Backbone 69. It was clear that Alex wasn't content to just ride on his father's coattails. He was determined to make his own mark in music. Over the years, Alex Orbison played in several bands, the most notable being White Star, a rock band in the 2000s that even landed a short-lived reality TV series on VH1. He lived the full rocker experience, touring dive bars and clubs, recording albums, and experiencing the triumphs and trials of the music industry. But even as he carved out his own identity, Alex never forgot where he came from. In interviews, he often acknowledged that having Roy Orbison as a father was like having a superhero in your family. He has said that as a kid, he didn't fully grasp how famous Roy was. To him, Roy was just Dad, the guy who made pancakes and told corny jokes at home. It was only later, seeing the continued reverence for Roy's music, that Alex truly understood his father's impact. Around 2012, after their mother Barbara's passing, Alex took on a more executive role in the family's affairs. He moved back to Nashville, honoring a promise to his mom to help handle Roy's legacy. Along with Wesley and Roy Jr., Alex co-founded Roy's Boys, LLC, the company that manages Roy Orbison's catalog and legacy. Alex became its president, channeling the organizational and creative skills he'd honed, both in music and in some film projects. Yes, he's also a writer, director, and film producer, in addition to being a drummer. Under Alex's leadership, Roy's Boys has spearheaded numerous projects that brought Roy's work back into the spotlight. He produced the 25th anniversary edition of Mystery Girl in 2014, which, as mentioned, included that special song, The Way Is Love, featuring all three brothers performing with their dad's vintage vocal track. Alex also helped unearth an entire lost Roy Orbison album from 1969 called One of the Lonely Ones, finally releasing it in 2015 so fans could hear the hidden gem. One of Alex's proudest achievements was the collaboration with London's renowned Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Alongside Wesley and Roy Jr., Alex co-produced two albums, A Love So Beautiful, 2017, and Unchained Melodies, 2018, which took Roy Orbison's original vocal recordings and set them to brand-new orchestral arrangements. The result was magical, Roy's singular voice soaring again with the lush backing of a full orchestra, introducing his music to a new generation in a fresh way. Alex traveled to Abbey Road Studios to oversee the recording of the orchestra, ensuring the project had the quality and respect his father's work deserved. These albums charted around the world, proving that more than 30 years after Roy's passing, his music could still captivate listeners, thanks in no small part to the loving efforts of his sons. In addition to musical projects, Alex co-authored with his brothers and writer Jeff Slate a comprehensive biography titled The Authorized Roy Orbison, 2017. This book gave fans unprecedented insight into Roy's life, filled with never-before-seen photos and stories only his family could tell. Alex's flair for storytelling and detail really shone in those pages, and he's not done yet. Alex has been involved in developing a biopic film about Roy Orbison's life, ensuring the script and production meet the family's approval. Even while juggling all these legacy projects, Alex never stopped being a musician. In 2024, he even joined the Allman Betts Band, a group featuring sons of the Allman Brothers Band members as their drummer, carrying on the rock tradition live on stage. Fans at recent shows might do a double take seeing Orby behind the drum kit, knowing that the spirit of Roy Orbison is present in the rhythm of those songs.